see my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us for this media training. We're very excited about the speakers we have lined up for this. Just a few items before we go ahead and get started. A reminder, this webinar will go until 2. It may go just a little long if some of the presenters are still going and we got a little late start, but we will do our best to end right at 2. The rest of you should be on mute, but if you have a comment or question, feel free to type it in the question box or the chat box. This is our second presentation we've done in the past few days. The first one last Thursday looked at how the media presents child abuse and prevention in its stories and how we can make sure our message is heard in a way that inspires people to want to play a role. If you'd like a recording of that webinar, you can email me after this presentation. The goal of this presentation is to leave you with a ton of tips and strategies for engaging the media with our prevention message and our work. So it's going to focus much more on the practical how-tos of developing a relationship with reporters and handling interviews. I'm going to be moderating the discussion and beginning with a short overview of why engaging the media is important and a few tips for my own days as a reporter with the Des Moines Business Record. And then I'll turn the presentation over to our 4 main presenters who have really taken time to reflect on their experiences in working with the media and are ready to share their best tips with you. So the presenters we have for today are Sherry Bowen, who's an agency administrator with Mills County Public Health, who's helped lead the Power of One campaign in the media in her area. And she's joined by Joe Foreman, who's the editor of the Opinion Tribune, who's going to give you a reporter perspective. We have Sue Swisher, who's executive director of the Child Abuse Council in the Quad Cities, and whose name I continue to see appear in newspapers in the Scott County area, providing comment on child abuse and prevention issues. Jana Enfield, executive director for the Child Abuse Prevention Services in Marshalltown, whose organization has found many creative ways to be in the news. And Steve Scott, our executive director at Prevent Child Abuse Iowa, who has extensive experience being interviewed by major media outlets on often very public child abuse cases. I'm recording the webinar, as I mentioned, so hopefully those who couldn't attend can check in and watch it. And I'm also available after this webinar to answer any questions or to help with any of your awareness efforts. I should also note on our website we have many tools and resources under our grantees section. And these resources often include press release templates and letters to the editor and things that can help you with reaching out for campaigns such as our Check Off Child Abuse campaign and Child Abuse Prevention Month. So check those out, and if you have other ideas of resources that would be helpful, please let me know. So with that, we get started in thinking about why we should be focusing on even engaging the media in the first place. And I think just to start out, being in the media helps give you a wider reach. It's a broader audience than we probably can meet with our presenters alone, or with our support group alone. Sorry, I keep seeing messages pop up. It also gives us credibility, so it's an objective third party that's writing about our organization, so it's not somebody who would obviously have an influence or stake in that. It's free. It's a cheap way to get your name out there, but it also brings risk. It's ultimately the reporter who's doing the work, and you have limited control of what ultimately gets printed, and sometimes that, as we talked about on Thursday, that's sometimes frames about child abuse that might not help further our cause or be what we necessarily want to see in the paper. But what we can do is prepare for the risks and take advantage of the benefits by developing our message, so we're prepared to respond when the media calls or there's an opportunity to comment. We can offer our expertise to stories that could use greater context or understanding from our prevention lens. And we can pitch our own stories about prevention so that we are being proactive and helping people understand the value we're bringing to our communities. Overall, I think we have a positive message to share, and it may be about a difficult subject, but if we stick to these positive messages and the good work we're doing, it can really help us begin to raise awareness of prevention overall in the work that we're doing. And I think it really starts, you'll see today, on building relationships with reporters and media so that they also have a better understanding of the area we're coming from and the stories we have to tell. And I think this is something I just wanted to share. I had done a media training, just a big 3-hour workshop a few months ago, and this was a worksheet that was shared with me. And I think it really helps to think about developing our message before we even begin the process of engaging the media, which is why we wanted to do the prevention messaging webinar last week. And a few tips from this. I can't take full credit for it. It was presented at this workshop, but I think, again, the tips are hit home with me. And that's start with have a home base or a place where you can turn to that reinforces the most important point you want to make. So what are some messaging, 2 to 4 sentences long, that you want to keep returning to in an interview? And that doesn't mean reading it word for word, otherwise it'll come off pretty stiff and not a conversation with a reporter, but these will help you get the main themes you want to keep practicing and coming back to as you keep talking with the reporter about whatever issue it is related to child abuse and prevention. We also have bridging, which allows you to move from one aspect or issue to another to steer the discussion back to your home base. So having phrases on hand like, in the meantime, or on the other hand, or it is important to share, or what must be clear is, can help lead you back to the message you want to get across. It's also important before beginning an interview or a conversation with a reporter to organize your thoughts. So especially if it's an issue you're responding to, having your thoughts organized by numbers can make a big difference. So such as, we have 2 concerns regarding this proposed legislation. There are 5 ways parents can check for, or this is one and only cause of. And so when you organize that, you're much more prepared. And it'll help you talk less and say more. So while you want to have a conversation with the reporter, and the tone should be conversational, your goal is to ultimately share your message. And so if you ramble on for a long time, the reporter is going to do the work of sharing that message for you and paring it down to what they see as the most important. So the more you can hone that down and make it clear, the more likely you're going to have what you want her to come across. And just a few more tips. As I mentioned, I was a former reporter, so as I was putting this together, I started to think about some of the things that really mattered to me. And here's just some ways that have really, I've seen help to really ensure that you're more likely to be heard and possibly have your message or story end up in the news. And that's send a press release when it's real news. With something like Prevention Month, there really needs to be a news angle to it and some relevance to it. For example, reporters often receive a lot of press releases about themed months. So it's better if you have something like, here's a family lined up who can speak about how they've recently been helped by a service that you've provided. Or here's an update on how many families we've served in the community over the past year. There needs to be, again, some kind of hook as to why the reporter and the broader community should care about this story right now. If you write a press release as a news story ready to be printed, it could have a greater chance of getting picked up. Reporters are extremely busy. They're always on deadline. So if there's a big gap in the paper or a place where they're looking for a good story to fill and you have a story that's ready to go, it has a greater chance of being picked up at that moment. Make sure you know which reporter is best to pitch the story to. So it's okay to call ahead and ask rather than mass messaging the entire newsroom, and that way you make sure you get it in the hands of the person who's going to be most important to hear what you have to say. I think it's important to also help reporters understand the relevance of the story to their area of focus. So when I worked at the Business Journal, we had to have a news angle for the stories we worked on, and some stories that would get pitched, I wouldn't see that angle, but those that took the time to really explain how it related really made a big difference. And if they could help put that connection together for me, it was easier for me to understand and to be much more excited about doing the story. And I think it's also important to note that reporters work really hard, and often you get a response if somebody's upset by a story you wrote or you accidentally made a mistake in the paper. And so, you know, one key way to establish a relationship is by calling or sending a note when you think a reporter did a good job with a story, even if it's not your own story. If it's a story you really valued, you got a lot out of, I think it can help and go a long way just to go out of your way and thank the reporter for their work. So with that, I've probably talked way too much already. I'm going to try to transfer this over to Sherry and Joe and see if we can get the audio to work. So we will go ahead and give this a shot.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sherry Bowen. I hope y'all can hear me. Here in Mills County, a smaller rural area, our Child Abuse Council, like all of you, we want to decrease instances of abuse in our community, and we want to put that education out there. But I think it's really important to look for that specific incident in your community that can provide a platform for education. So to do that, we have to be aware of what's happening in our community. Back in February, late January of this year, Mills County had experienced 2 infant deaths within an 18-month period, and on the front page of the Glenwood Opinion Tribune were articles about the sentencing of one of the individuals from the case almost 2 years ago, side by side with the news story of the new death of an infant and charges being filed. So really a devastating situation for our community. And as a council, we talked at length about the best way that we could offer support and education in our community. How do we respond here to best meet the needs of our community and educate folks about the issue? So I think it's really important to have that personal approach to child abuse prevention, and I think that adds strength to your media campaign. Whether you decide to share your abuse statistics, if you are like us and you have a very unfortunate incident in your community, so that you can personalize that incident in your community to provide education and resources. I think it makes it much more powerful. Our plan here in Mills County included an ongoing approach, and we started with the power of one. We all have the power to make a difference in the lives of children and families in our community. We utilized online resources combined with information about our local support services, ways that we provided community support, could encourage families to participate in those helping services, and encourage community residents to support each other. So that was sort of our starting point with the power of one. What's the best way to get your message out? Is it a one-time media article? Is it multiple educational articles for an ongoing approach? Newspaper, radio, interviews, a poster campaign, Facebook, website, email lists? Do you want to involve your faith-based community to help you get the word out? There are so many ways to do that, but we had to determine what fits best for your individual community and for your individual situation. We also need to be prepared before the incident occurs or before we get to the point of, oh my gosh, we need to get word out to the community. How do we do that? You need to have that fully developed media list at your fingertips, and that includes contacts by name for newspaper, television, radio in your community. We need that name, the phone number, the email contact, and then it's important to know, how do those sources like to receive their information? Do they want you to do an article ready to put in the paper? Do they much prefer to research their own information? Is email the best way? What file format do they accept? So your preparation in this area is really critical when you need to move quickly with information. Do you have first-name relationships with your local newspaper editor or the radio news manager? Those relationships are critical, and they're well worth working to develop. So I would encourage all of you, if you don't already have those relationships in place, that it's a great time to just take a moment and maybe make a face-to-face contact with those folks and try to get on a first-name basis and find out a little bit more about each other. In our county, I contacted Joe Foreman, who is the editor of the Opinion Tribune, our weekly newspaper, and Joe was very willing to discuss the situation with me and was willing to to give us a format to provide community education and support in response to those infant deaths, and was willing to do that on an ongoing basis for us. So that was really, really helpful, I think, in establishing our media campaign and keeping that going, because without that relationship, we'd be starting at square one. You need to determine who's the best resource for presenting your information. Do you need to use a community expert? Can you identify a champion in your community who might be the best spokesperson for you, for your topic? Do you want to highlight community resources? There's a whole lot of ways to go at it, but throughout all of that plan and with our message, our power of one, our message, a part of our message needed to remain consistent. So we did include the power of one on all materials and focused on that each individual does have an opportunity to make change in a whole lot of ways. And we also provided ongoing reference to the very same local source for information. We did supply a wealth of other sources, but we wanted to give that consistent base so that folks could know that one resource was always going to be there for whatever question they had. So that consistency is just really important. We provided media ready articles on a monthly basis to our local newspapers, to radio stations. We used websites, Facebook. We did use email news lists, including our school and some of our employer listings. We did interviews, talking with Joe Foreman at the Opinion Tribune. We did also have an interview with the Non-Pareil, which is the Council Bluffs paper, and we did have on-air interviews with both KMA and KCSI radios, which are the two local radio stations here in our rural area. Our campaign provided information for a 5-month period. We started in January and then on a consistent basis sent that information out. Right now we're no longer doing monthly. Information did include education on prevention, on local support services, and on community involvement. You don't have to create everything from scratch. We call it resourcing, sharing of our resources, but we utilized a multitude of resources. Prevent Child Abuse Iowa being a large resource for us in articles. We provided media-ready articles. We did quotes from local experts, and again, lots of community resources. Our articles, we tried to limit to no more than 1 page. We wanted to be very concise and specific, and again, consistent with our messages. We included our contact names, a cell number, and email contact so that we could provide more information if needed. My last tidbit here says that, we need to follow through with our media plan. We need to provide what we said we would. If we informed our editor that, we don't have the information they asked, but we will get that to you, we need to follow up. You need to get that information back as you stated you would. We don't have to know everything. We just need to know where to get the information and provide it when we find it. Our credibility is based on that follow-through, so I would encourage all of you to just be very careful that if you promised information in a specific time frame, that you do your very best to provide that. Now I'd like to turn this over to Joe Foreman, who is the editor of the Opinion Tribune. Joe has some tips for you.
Joe, are you coming through? We'll see in a minute if Joe can get on. Joe, are you able to get on? Okay, it looks like his
Sarah, I can just go ahead and go with the information we have here, and if he can get on, we'll turn it over to him. I asked Joe just to help us with some tips that would let us work more effectively with our local media, and these were the tips that he came up with, and I'm in full agreement with all of them. we need to know the newspaper's deadline for submission of articles. Weeklies are often printed off-site and they're circulated through the U.S. Postal Service, and that accounts for a deadline that might be 48 to 72 hours prior to the day of the week the paper typically comes out. So it's really important that we take the time to find that information out. What is the deadline so that we get those articles in timely? It's really important to give a heads up for important or time-sensitive articles. If there's information that I know won't be ready on time to meet that deadline, it's important that I give the newspaper a heads up that something is going to be coming after the deadline so that they're aware and ready. It's just good to give them a quick note about that so that they're in the loop. One designated media relations person is also really helpful from Joe's perspective. If it's possible to have one designated media relations person on your staff so the newspaper knows who to contact when they are looking for information for a story, that's really helpful. Joe also asked that this person would be somebody with a very positive demeanor. So we need to put our best foot forward here, folks, and get that one designated person if we can. Press releases Joe's requesting should always have that contact person's name and phone number so that they can follow up for clarification if it's needed. The next one was to only forward press releases or informational pieces from state or national agencies to your local paper that are of significance to your community. I know, like my desk, you guys get overrun with a wealth of information that comes to you, and it's all important, but if you send your paper every state or national release that comes to you, the important ones can get overlooked. So we need to look at those with a focus that says just the really significant releases should be forwarded. Don't be afraid to pitch your ideas, and I'm glad Joe's open to that because I do that periodically. If you become aware of a situation or an issue that you believe would make for an interesting article or maybe a series of articles in the newspaper, don't be afraid to pitch it to your paper. We're always looking for interesting topics and interesting people to write about, so don't be afraid to make that pitch. Also, the product must best serve our readers, and from Joe's perspective, that's always interesting for me. We need to keep in mind that Joe's producing a product that he believes will best serve the readers. They receive press releases daily on various issues, and it's their job to decide which articles and information will be of the most value to their readers. So just because we send it doesn't mean it's always going to get posted, but definitely we need to keep that in mind when we're forwarding information to our local media sites. The last slide that I have today is just the first paragraph of the first Power of One article that we posted in our paper. It goes on from here to inform the public on what they can do to prevent child abuse and to support children in their community. The focus of this was we just really wanted to grab people's attention and to be sure that they were really interested in the information that we wanted to put out and to really push that power of one person, one community, $1, one action can help protect children from abuse and neglect. We received really good response from our area newspapers and our radio stations, and our thanks to folks like Joe Foreman who were willing to work with us on this. He also, in addition to doing an interview with us and publishing our Media Ready articles, did write a really nice article on his own regarding the Power of One campaign. If I leave you with anything today, you can make a difference and you can work effectively with all forms of media in your community. You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to start now to develop those relationships.
Great. Thank you so much for jumping in, Sherry. That was really helpful. I'm glad Joe took good notes on that and could share that with you. I think what I want to do right now is just pause and open it up for questions. If anybody has specific questions for Sherry about the Power of One campaign that they did, you can type those now into the box, and we'll give it just a second. Anybody have any quick questions for Sherry before we move on? Okay, well with that, I think we'll turn it over to Sue. And thank you so much, Sherry. And Sue, you should be able to be on the line. We're still playing with technology here, but hopefully you are now on. Are you coming through, Sue? Were you able to get on, Sue? It looks like your microphone's working. Okay. Well, what I think I'll do, if Steve is on the line, Jana has not been able to log in. We're having all kinds of issues on here, but we might just skip ahead and go to Steve's slide and then see if Sue can jump on in a little bit. So I'm going to switch ahead, and Steve had some comments prepared on managing the interview and how we go ahead and do that. Steve, are you able to get on the line?
I'm on the line now. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can everybody hear Steve? Can get a comment on anybody from the attendees out there? Are you able to hear Steve? Oh, it looks like Stu's now on too. I think we'll go ahead. Everybody can hear you, but we'll go ahead and switch back to Stu for a quick second and then go back to Steve. Sorry, this is all okay. A bunch of technology issues, so 1 second. I am switching over to Sue. Sue, can you hear? Or can you come on?
I can. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I think you're coming in clear. So we will go ahead and go through yours. It's always a
quite a process,
so
right?
Much easier if we could all get to one spot, but it doesn't work that way.
That's understandable. Well, I'm really pleased to be part of this group of folks this afternoon, I guess now. I just prepped 2 slides and really wanted to keep my comments very kind of practical and down to earth. I tried to follow one of the primary principles of any good communication, which is to consider the audience. And I know that out there participating in the webinar, we probably have the full range, everything from those who are really experienced and adept, like Sherry from Mills County, to absolute newbies who are just trying to get as much information as they can. My first slide really is very basic. It's going to reiterate pretty much the overarching themes that everyone has talked about thus far, but I want to go over again. Media-driven contacts. When the media picks up the phone and calls you, they are reacting by and large. They are reacting to a story that's hit the national press or television. It's a fast-developing story, and they're looking for local commentary. Those are reactive kinds of contacts. The plan and the campaign that Sherry helped to develop, beautiful, I'm really envious of that, the Power of One campaign, are clearly proactive media relationships where the locus of control, who's got the lead, is really being driven out of the council. And like the slide says, the sweet spot is the ability to tell your story via the media story. I think in the back of everyone's mind with every contact, particularly if it's around media messaging, is the reality that no matter what the story is coming at our direction, we need to tell our story. The balance is the tough part, I think. Determining whether you're in a position as a local council to be able to be proactive, to develop a campaign, to have basic talking points and stories that you're in the driver's seat about can be very limited. I know that for smaller councils operating perhaps sometimes out of multiple counties. The balance between the proactive and the reactive has to be defined, I believe, by each and every council, and working hard at that. Finding the proper balance is up to each council. My point is always find what you're comfortable with, what you think works well, and then really push yourself, stretch yourself. Because let's all be honest, for the most of us, working with the media is not our favorite thing to do. So we do have to push and stretch ourselves. Some basic thoughts to share that I wanted to put down on paper and looked out over the last 13 years. And this has been a journey. The person on the line talking to you right now, Sue Swisher, nearly failed college communications course. So over the course of time, however, I've definitely developed a comfort level with audiences and dealing with the media. So even the newbies can really grow in this area through preparation and practice. One of my primary goals at the Child Abuse Council is to be the go-to source for child abuse and neglect. It really helps that child abuse is specifically in our name and in our logo and in all of our materials. That really helps define for the media right out of the starting gate. If they're looking for a local resource and they type the keywords child abuse in, up pops the local name, and I assume that's true for many of the councils. That really helps us get a leg up before we even attempt to relate to the media. So we want to be the go-to source. We stake that claim and back it up. Staff here know that if there's a media story out and about child abuse and neglect, and we haven't been called, I'm not going to be happy about that. We need to be the place where people come to, because every contact with the media is a unique chance to inform, engage, and position ourselves as an organization that people want to get on board with, they want to get engaged with, they want to support through their volunteer time or through their donations. So our intent is to always be as responsive to media requests as possible. And if you've dealt with the media, you know if it's coming from them, it is fast breaking, and they are on deadline, and the timeline can be incredibly short. I am the designated spokesperson here at the Child Abuse Council, so I'm the individual who will ultimately, for the most part, get tapped. We are in the process of developing some other spokespersons additionally, but for now, it's primarily me. I will set aside everything that I possibly can in order to respond to the media. I'll be honest and say I may not always appreciate that. It interrupts my daily schedule. Sometimes it interrupts meetings or planned meetings. But I remind myself of the ultimate importance of responding. However, I do, and I think Sherry also mentioned this, that we are cautious and careful about not over-responding and being overexposed. There are definitely times when the media contacts us that it's just not a good fit for us. It may be off of our core expertise, and then we just very kindly explain to them that we do not feel we're the real expert in that arena, and then we always try to have a backup resource to refer them on to. Very important in any relationship, of course, to get to know the individuals on the other side of the relationship, get to know the reporters. It's a silly statement, but yes, they are people. They have likes, dislikes. The more you get to know them and the more that they understand that you're a real person, the more smoothly that relationship will go. Take them out to lunch, take them out for coffee, put them on see if you can get them to like you on your Facebook page, follow them on Twitter. All of those connections become important to those individual reporters. One of the points talks about engaging reporters, again, through your email blasts and through your social media networks. Reporters are interested in child abuse prevention. They want to know what's happening here, and they want to know that when they make the call to us, that we'll be there for them. Most importantly of all, as I wrap up my time here, is I want to indicate that if there's any possibility of recruiting a media representative for your board or for your council, that is a great strategy. We sort of happened into that maybe 12 or so years ago, and we're able to locate a media representative. Now, it was not a reporter. I think that could be a little bit difficult and challenging. It wasn't a reporter, but it was a young woman working as an account executive, basically in sales at one of our local television stations, ABC as a matter of fact. And she joined our board, became like our #1 advocate, and she single-handedly almost was able to ensure really great response from her television station whenever we had a press release, whenever there was a breaking issue or item. So she was like gold to us, and was able to fill that role for about 8 years. And during that time, we continued to strengthen and position ourselves as the go-to source.
That's great.
I think that's pretty much what I wanted to share.
Well, thank you very much for all these points. Does anybody have any questions for Sue? Well, I'll also open it up at the end, but any quick questions for Sue before we move on? If I'm waiting, I will go ahead and see if we can switch. But okay, it doesn't look like that. Before we jump over to Steve, I was looking at Jana's notes, and I just wanted to point out a couple things since she couldn't jump on the line that I think are really important to note about working with the media that perhaps are points that haven't been made yet. And so I am switching over to hers, and just wanted to point out some things that she made me think about when I looked at her slides. And that's just the process of developing a relationship from the beginning. I think we've talked about it a lot, but getting to know the reporter and what they consider newsworthy and what they devote space to. So by getting to know the reporter and the newspaper and how they even like to be contacted, I think is a really good tip to think about, just to spend that time starting to know before you even pitch anything specifically. And I think on that same token is giving them a snapshot of what you do as an organization, more about the statistics, the staff. One tip I heard once from somebody is they went and had coffee meetings with reporters and just set up meetings, and they maybe had a couple feature stories in their back pocket, but they really used it as a chance just to talk with the reporter about what they did, what their organization does in the community, and then also what the reporter is looking for. So I think taking that time just to really develop those relationships initially is a great step. The other thing I wanted to know about Jana's slides as well is she really provides a lot of different ways of getting in the news. It's not necessarily just a press release when you have a news item, but you can invite reporters and people in the media to your upcoming events. Just make sure you do it way ahead of time. And especially with radio or TV, including them in the event planning, they may see it as a marketing opportunity for them as well. So I think there's partnership opportunities in working on your events to really think about how to engage the media early on. We talked a lot about press releases, so those are, a news story when something, is really relevant and you have a good story to pitch. But there's also letters to the editor. And those, like I said, we have templates on our website, but there's a lot of opportunity to, share your opinion. So if there's a case in the news that you really think deserves comment on or greater context, to be able to provide that perspective. And what we did for our Check Off Child Abuse campaign is approach a lot of just news stations, their new news programs, they're always looking for a nonprofit or somebody to feature. And so we use that as an opportunity to get our message out in a more featured news segment way. So a lot of them you just call up, and if it's a morning talk show on the radio or, you know, the news feature story, just say what you're doing and see if you can have 5 minutes on the news to be interviewed. And those are really easy. We send talking points ahead of time. They only last a couple minutes, and they usually follow whatever talking points you give. And I think the other one is the PSAs. We've created the Check Off Child Abuse PSA for this past year, and we'll probably look at one for Prevention Month as well. But, you know, just a 30-second segment that can go on TV and news, and a lot of stations still offer opportunity to be able to get on the air that way. Sometimes they're not the most desirable spots, but we had a lot of luck working with Mediacom this year and got over 9,000 spots for the checkoff. So I think, you know, if you really work and engage a lot of different stations, it's a good way to get out on a lot of different channels, your message. So those are kind of Jana's summary, or at least from my perspective. I'm going to skip ahead now to Steve, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to actually handle the interview part.
Okay, are people able to hear me?
You're coming through.
Oh, I'm coming through. Okay, good. I will get started.
Yep.
I wanted to thank those who've gone on ahead. I think you've laid a really good groundwork for us all. Sorry you can't join in. Jana has been very good at anticipating issues with the media, which would be an important point. I think has been a resource every year in responding to child abuse data with them. So that would be another element I would stress, that if you have this ongoing relationship with a media source or a particular type of media, anticipating those times when they are likely to call you and being ready for that is a good thing to do. I wanted to talk about 3 elements of working with the media. One would be essentially discussing the possible appearance. The second would be preparing for it. And the third would be conducting it. And these are mostly modeled after being involved with television interviews, but they also would work with radio and newspaper interviews. And they all play off the basic reality, which Sue mentioned, which is that you're there to comment on a story. You are rarely called to comment on an issue totally in a vacuum by itself. So one of the important things right away is to get some sense of what the story is. And the story could be an event. It could be something that just happened to the legislature. It could be a report that just came out. And before making any comments, you should have some sense what it is you are commenting about. You don't have to be immersed in all the details, but I've never commented on a report out from the legislature or a bill without first reading it and not just going on what the reporter has told me. The second thing as you approach a story is there is a kind of negotiation that goes on. You are being called for a reason. It may be the perspective that you bring, or it may be that they are looking for a particular comment from you. And that may or may not be a perspective you want to bring, or it may not be a comment that you want to make. And so you are then in a position with the media person to talk through what it is you see in the issue that would be of larger importance. And of course, you would be looking from the prevention angle, as opposed to what you might be expected to say. I think Sue may have mentioned that media people are often very anxious for interviews. And so often you're in a position where you really might be the only person available. They're up against a deadline. So you're not necessarily negotiating from a position of weakness. So often I've been able to approach a situation where I was expected to say A and said, well, I really can't speak to A, but I can speak to D or F, and move the discussion in that direction. Clearly, if you're in a position where you can't, they want you to say one make one particular comment or speak in only one area, or it's an issue that doesn't fit, then it's fine to pass on. And let me just share quickly one recent experience for me where I did take a pass, which was a phone call from one of the television reporters about the really awful incident in Dayton where two girls were abducted. One escaped, the other was killed. The offender was someone who had been for 20 years in prison as a sex offender, but that 20 years had actually been only half of the term he had served. He had picked up the girls far from their home or school, so it wasn't an instance of someone who lived nearby them or had necessarily been at the school to pick them up, and really was a kind of awful but very random event that, while as terrible as it is, was something we don't normally encounter, and few of us really do much to prevent. And the issue the reporter wanted me to address was the issue of the length of prison sentences and a proposal to make those sentences longer. There really was no prevention angle I could discern from all of this, and as a result passed on the interview. So it certainly, there will be occasions where you don't have an opportunity to speak to your message. You are speaking to something that really is not in your area of expertise, and it's fine to pass on that. As you then decide to go ahead or not, one of the critical decisions is this a good opportunity for you to convey your message, to engage the public in prevention? And there may be some instances, even where you may be able to speak to it, where there isn't that opportunity for you for whatever reason. And it's your decision at that point whether you want to weigh providing some information to the media and assisting in a relationship that may be ongoing, or again, keeping yourself confined to situations where you can clearly speak to your message. If you've decided to go ahead with the interview, it does provide an event that you can address, or an issue that would give you a springboard to convey the prevention message. It's very important as you approach that interview to have 2 or 3 points in mind that you are ready to state. And it may be a soundbite that you have in mind. Before I start an interview, I usually have, again, 2 or 3 points that I know I want to make. And I will make those points even if I'm not asked for that. I was very fortunate early starting this to talk to someone from the Attorney General's office or listen to him, who said you don't have to answer fully the question that you were asked. You may acknowledge a question, but then take it in a very different direction. And let me give you one example of where we did that, and it led to a very positive media effort. We were contacted about 5 years ago about a case in Indiana where a camera in a parking lot caught a woman hitting her child several times because the child was not getting into the back seat. It was something that was all over the place, and we received a phone call, and it was about that case. And the question was, where is the line between corporal punishment that is okay and something that is physical abuse? And I really didn't see any point in trying to answer that question, first of all, at all, generally speaking, but certainly not with that example. And instead said to the media person that that wasn't a question I necessarily wanted to answer, especially with that instance, because it was not even close to the borderline, but rather I wanted to address the issue of what is discipline and how narrowly discipline is seen, unfortunately. And we actually ended up with 3 segments over a period of 2 nights, raising the reality that discipline does not always have to be physical. It can be positive. It can have many different elements to it. And then by the end, we actually were able to share some points about how you might behave in public where you saw someone doing something that was potentially harmful to a child. So you can take a question, negotiate it, and eventually end up where you want to be. But again, you need to be ready with the point you want to make. There's one other thing that would be very critical is approaching the interview, having in mind what kind of takeaway there might be for the media or for the general public. In other words, what suggestions you might be able to give for action. As I mentioned with Indiana, we had a list which the television posted of how to respond in public. I often will have a legislative bill that could be mentioned or report. You certainly have to try to work the programs that you're involved with into the discussion. A phone number someone can call as a volunteer, but media is often very open to having suggestions for what people can do in response to a request. As you, though, approach conducting the interview, in some instances you really have to consider what the cost of the interview may be compared to what benefit you would get. And there may be some instances where the kind of comments you would make or would want to make may not be worth the cost of making them. And this may be the cost in terms of relationships you might have where you might be in a position to make a critical comment on them, or appear to, in not making a critical comment, be dodging an issue. And I will just very briefly mention one instance. In 2003, we had the governor, Governor Vilsack, veto a bill that would have established clergy as mandatory reporters. He did it because of another provision relating to the reporting of child sexual abuse. The veto was done. The legislation was killed. There was no opportunity to override the veto. He was still going to be the governor for another few years, and I really did not take the opportunity to weigh in with my sentiment about the governor's actions. So again, be aware that in some instances there could be more cost than the benefit you would receive. As you actually conduct the interview, I would say that I often take time just to have an informal discussion. That discussion, I think, makes you a little more relaxed in approaching the interview. It also maybe helps the person see a wider perspective, maybe gives you, again, an opportunity to push the issues that you want to, or focus the discussion more in the area that you want. And that's I think, important, and usually they're willing to have a couple minutes while they're setting up the interview to do that. As you actually do the interview itself, one of the questions I learned right away is you be as succinct as you can in your answers, that you don't give complex answers, and you don't give on the one hand, on the other hand answers. Unfortunately, there have been instances where I've started and said, some people might say this, and then other people's might say that, or that would be another perspective, and actually had only one of those reported. So be succinct, be clear, have your talking points ready. I also would put on one of the slides the importance of body language. I'm obviously not going to get into that, except to say one thing that I've noticed right away in looking at myself doing interviews, and then others, is the importance of being leaning forward and clearly looking engaged, as opposed to sitting back in a chair, and the body language that conveys. So if I can only convey that one point, that's what I would suggest that you really focus on. Many interviews will say, many interviewers at the end will say, are there any questions I haven't asked, or is there any additional point you would like to make? And that's really your opportunity for making a final summation. That should be, if you haven't had a chance to work in your talking points, that is the opportunity to do it. If you've worked in your talking points but you haven't really stated them as well as you wanted to, that would be the chance to come back to it again. They're not going to run both of those segments of the interview. So I would really be ready to take advantage of all that, and that would be a good chance to state very clearly the message you would want to convey if you were allowed to have that run without it being cut at all. And then finally, leaving the reporter with a handout of some kind. It could be a list. It could be information about your organization. It could be a graph that they could use if you're talking about child abuse data or something else. But at least having something that they leave with that reminds them of their organization, the issue. It may or may not appear, but it's something they will have, and it might actually be something they would refer back to at another time and remember you for a possible interview. And that's all I have to say.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve. I think with that, I really appreciate the presenters jumping on today and sharing very in-depth points. We're open to questions now, so if anybody has questions for specific presenters, I'm going to try to unmute everybody, and hopefully that doesn't echo, so we will test this out. Are there any questions for any of the panelists? I think, and while we're waiting, I think one of the questions I have for the panelists is how do you handle just becoming comfortable with it, handling the nerves of going into an interview? And I think how have you kind of gotten seasoned in that, and either that or train somebody else on your staff to be able to handle that as well?
Well, this is Sherry. I'm a bit of a blabbermouth, as you can tell by my presentation, I think. My biggest challenge is reining that back, and Steve's advice, I think, is really good in that you don't want to talk too much, so I try to talk very slowly, and I try to hit my points the best I can and not let my conversational tone go too far, because sometimes that can get me into trouble, but practice definitely helps.
What I would say is that Sue mentioned where she started. It's really hard to start at the top of your game. I certainly don't think I'm there yet, but I certainly wasn't anywhere earlier. I think what can relieve the pressure would be two things. One is again, I had mentioned the informal discussion ahead of time. The second is that you don't go in thinking that you have to answer every question perfectly. You have to get everything right. What your primary responsibility is to convey 2 or 3 points, talking about the child abuse prevention issue, opportunities, and engaging people. And that's basically what you want to have out there in the public. And the fact that maybe there were half dozen other questions that you may have not given the best answers to doesn't really matter all that much.
And I think for me what has helped along the way is the realization that the media wants to deliver on the goods. They want a good story. They want you to look good. Now, I'm not talking about circumstances where they might be coming to you because of a crisis or there's some sort of expose they're trying to uncover. I'm not talking about that type of media coverage. But they really are there to help educate and to help you present well. So I have to say, knock on wood, it could happen to me yet, but I've never been thoroughly disappointed or upset by an article, an interview, or anything. I may criticize it and go, oh, I should have said this or that, but I've never felt as if the media has taken, whether it's a newspaper or television, radio, that anybody's taken advantage of me.
Great, thanks. We do have a question that came in, and this is specifically for Sherry. How did Mills County come up with their campaign? Any quick tips to lead the council to doing this? How long did it take?
Well, we had a meeting, and it was shortly after that newspaper front page had come out, and we just felt like we had to do something. And so we all decided we would do a little bit of research and determine what would be the best way to respond. And I talked with our local newspaper person, Joe, who was also very instrumental in helping us decide on, a monthly printing, a monthly article of some sort. We bootleg stuff all over the place, so the power of one is definitely borrowed from others, and so definitely we tapped into other online resources for child abuse prevention, and then we sort of brand that with our own name. You have to be careful when you're using other people's materials, but educational articles and information is pretty much just available to the public for use. So don't hesitate to tap into other public resources that are out there, because none of us have time to reinvent the wheel. Once we kind of came up with the power of one, then that was our singing point, I guess, that said we all can make a change, and then we just started developing articles. We assigned some articles to different members of the team. Maybe it was a Parents as Teachers group that was a support program. They did one article, and then I sort of just tweaked to make sure we had that consistent messaging. But we utilized our programs who were experts in themselves to help kind of put their information together. But we sort of came up with it on the fly, and we begged, borrowed, and borrowed again.
That's great. Thanks. I'm kind of putting people on mute and taking them off in a second because I think there's an echo when we're all on. So if I missed you, just let me know. I'll just end with one final question since we're getting over time. I just know we had a late start, but how do you, and this will be for the whole group, but what about an unresponsive or difficult report? Are those times when you try to reach out and get your message heard and you feel like they just ignore you? Is there some tricks to kind of making sure you really make that connection? And anybody can jump in.
Well, this is Sherry. I think that we'll send out information periodically, and it won't ever appear in the paper. And you know, we have a couple ways of looking at that. We can think, well, you know, they don't like us, they're not going to print our material. What I think the best way for us has been is to just contact wherever we sent that, to say, gosh, sent you some information, I know things are crazy for you, would you have any other ideas on how we might present this material in a better way? And sometimes what we get is, oh, you know, we just didn't have room, we have that slotted for next week. Or sometimes we get some really good feedback that says, you know, we had an article kind of similar to that, and you might try this approach. So I think we don't want to stalk our media folks, but as Joe said, they're the ones who make that decision on what gives them the best product for their readers. So we have to be respectful of that, but again, relationship building lets you ask that question.
Anyone else want to jump in and comment? Okay. Well, I think that was a good response. I will go ahead and end it here since we are close to being out of time, and actually we've gone over. Really appreciate all of you jumping on, and sorry for some of the technology issues. It's my first time managing a panel as a webinar. Hopefully it all came through okay. We did record it, and with its glitches and all, so you will be able to get that recording and listen. But I'm also available to talk about what you learned today, any comments or questions you want to make after the webinar. And please, we'd love to hear how you've taken the lessons learned and done something with us as well. We're always looking for success stories from other councils and sites and what's really worked in terms of getting the prevention messaging out. So really appreciate the panelists for joining us today and putting their thoughts together, and really appreciate all of you joining us for this really important topic. So thanks a lot. We'll go ahead and sign out, but if you have any questions, please follow up with me after the webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.